Well over that number. All right, so Dave Aranda yesterday, in an interview we had, listen to this part of the interview. He made this comment. How many times, Garrett, Craig, and Paul, during the season, did Dave Aranda allude to the fact that there were just things missing, some issues with just chemistry, and that's a big word that we use too much. Not a big word, but just there's something that was missing, and you could obviously see that from about midway through the season and on. How many times did we hear that in a press conference or weekly presser?
A few times. I mean, like, I couldn't put a number on it, but you could always tell that there was like this uneasiness around, like, where the year before, I mean, everything was, sunshine and puppies. Like, everything was going well. The team was coming together. There was this hard work. Everybody kind of bought in, and then you could just feel like no one was buying in.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard about it 1,000 times at this point. So, yeah, it's been a topic pretty much every time we've talked about this team, I think, since last year. It's been an ongoing thing. So, yeah, it's been out there.
Well, so he admitted that he was too lenient earlier in the spring. Spring game is a week from Saturday. Here's the conversation again. This is just a couple of minutes. And I had somebody ask me this question. Is this him learning to become even more of a CEO? Does it show any kind of weakness of what he said as well by the fact he admits there were mistakes that he made as a head football coach? What's the difference in you now entering year 4 as a football coach, a head coach, than it was in 2020? And I know 2020 was unique circumstances.
A lot more comfortable. I think, starting in 2020, you'd be talking to coaches that were head coaches in the past, or maybe head coaches for you, and you'd bring up situations. Hey, what'd you think? How'd you do this? And I remember some of those being in some of those circumstances that were kind of brought up in those talks. And I'm trying to remember the ABC 1, 2, 3 that they told me, and that wasn't always the case, but probably more than what I would like it to be. That was the case. And so just that whole process of finding yourself and kind of now going into year 4 and having an idea of kind of this, I think it's still good to reach out and talk to people, because you can kind of juxtapose kind of your thoughts now on theirs, and this is why they did theirs, and this is why I'm feeling I'm doing mine, and you can weed out any ego or any of the stuff that's kind of behind the scenes there lurking. So, it's better to have a foundation than to be looking for one, for sure.
You mentioned you might have been too lenient last year, coming off the best year ever in Baylor football. You seem to be somebody that when you trust somebody, you trust somebody. Loyalty, commitment, and all that. Did that bother you that perhaps some took advantage of you?
No, I appreciate the question. I think, the leniency probably came just with not suspending guys, not kicking guys off the team. I think, I'm very much from the school of just my own personality and just a lot of the folks that
yeah. Can you re-rack that?
Let me see here. That might be a corrupted file. So
okay, but he got to the point. He got to the comment that made me follow up again. But for not suspending guys and not kicking guys off the team, not for anything legal, not for anything criminal, but just enough to where there was a little bit of a cancerous cell, so to speak, inside, whether it's the locker room or position groups or whatever. Does that show growth, or does that show weakness?
I mean, admitting it shows growth. I mean, it showed that maybe there was a weakness, that maybe he wasn't, capable of taking that step when he should have been. But the fact that you can admit it shows growth to me, and it is kind of weird to hear, because this wasn't a team that had a lot of like legal issues or anything like that, but there are other things that happen on teams that are not legal, that are just, team rules violations, or, and he went on to say, like, it's not just kicking guys off the team. It was also maybe some suspensions, or suspensions from practice, or taking away some of these other things that he did not do that he's going to do in the future. So a lot of coaches would never admit that, ever.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it similarly, but I think also I'm a little more careful, and I understand he's a very very, how do you describe Dave Aranda? Very introspective and well thought out person, but I don't know. I feel like sometimes we treat everything he says differently than just a regular old ball coach, and he's just a football coach too. Like, he's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a professor. I mean, he's got traits like that, but I don't know. I just think that sometimes we can almost want to read too much into it because he's so smart. He kind of like, what puzzle is he figuring out? Whereas, like, if it's just Hugh Freeze is like, yep, should have suspended guys, and we just kind of move on. With Aranda, it's like, let's unpack this box of logic, and it's it's kind of cool to do that sometimes, but like, I don't think everything is necessarily because of that, like, super deep and introspective, just because when he says it, that's how it sounds. So I think that he's clearly a very introspective guy and a very deep guy. And, as far as things he learned last year, he learned that he's got to probably rule with a bit of a, iron fist in comparison to whatever soft glove he was ruling with previously. I think just simply not having some of those guys on the team will probably help that. I think they probably learned some lessons in terms of the guys they recruited. Not that they recruited necessarily every guy that caused trouble, because they did have a lot of carryover too. But I just think that when you're a young head coach, these are the lessons that you learn. Like, Nick Saban may have learned about every lesson at this point, but I'd imagine there's still one on occasion that he's like, oh, man, wish I would have done that differently. Yep. So Dave Aranda's going into year 4 with absolutely no experience prior to that other than being a coordinator and assistant coach. So I think it's just natural evolution that if you talk to him heading into year 4, he's going to have things like player discipline that he thinks he needs to improve on. If you talk to him next year, it's going to be something else. If you talk to him in 5 years, it'll be something else, and so on and so forth, because that's what the guy does. He never stops learning, and so I think that that's a definite positive, is that he acknowledges his mistakes. He doesn't try to act like they're not mistakes or try to pretend like there's nothing wrong. It was clear as day that something was wrong last year. He just couldn't say it in the middle of the season.
Right.
But he said it as soon as the season was over with the coaching moves that he made. He said it with the other moves that have been made throughout this offseason. And now that we've had time for him to digest it, he said it multiple times now of like, I should have done this differently. And so I think that that's a great trait because, some guys might be stubborn or too egotistical to want to admit something like that, even though it's natural to admit that you don't know everything and not everything's going to be perfect. So I'm glad that he's addressed it, and hopefully that has sunk into the team, and that's not something they have to deal with too much moving forward.
Cougar Tail, just like a parent can't be buddies with their kids, Dave Aranda cannot be buddies with his players.
Yeah.
Paxton said Charlie Strong, when he came into UT, nuked a few guys off the roster. Some of them probably were on their way out anyway. He did that. Dave Aranda from St. Dominic's Rosary is a class act. Deion Sanders is not. I don't know. Deion doesn't need to be put into that conversation, but that's fine. That's your opinion. Let's see here.
Deion has a much bigger ego than Dave Aranda. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the difference. But, I mean, well, you're the only one in this thing who's really spending time with him personally, length of time.
Everybody has an ego. Dave Aranda has an ego. It's just that you don't know. It's not going to be something that he's going to throw out there a lot and promote himself. BU at 12 with Patrick Aranda is truly transparent. He's very transparent. He's a very measured man from Cougar Tail. Paxton Time Bomb Aranda. Let me see here. All right. Scotty B. Paxton, I would think that Micah Mazuka as a player, he's now, where is he now? Because he transferred and then he's
transferring again. I don't know if he's
As for coaches, I say former defensive coordinator and safety coach, also a part of that conversation of what maybe went on too much. Let's see here. Does Dave Aranda have his yin to his yang? I think he admits that sometimes he doesn't. There you go. So there you are with some of the responses in the chat room.
I want to go back to Charlie Strong for a second. Charlie Strong went and did that, but Charlie Strong also had unreasonable, I think, expectations about what he was going to be able to control in Austin, Texas. I think that he didn't kind of really realize where he was because, Craig went to a press conference one time and sat and waited for him for like 3 hours. And one of the things he said during that press conference, I remember, was, we're not going to have anybody who smokes marijuana on the Texas Longhorns. And I went, buddy, I mean, look, I know that that's your goal, but you are in Austin, Texas. You're all kind of technically doing it just by practicing outside. So I don't know.
You talking about the fresh hair?
Yeah. So I don't know what you think is going to happen. So, and that was kind of it for everything.
It was also during a time, and let's be honest, and this is true, Baylor was going through a lot of issues with their football program, being in the headlines for all of the wrong reasons, and that was also a reaction, well, we're going to make sure we run a clean ship. Did it work for them? No, it did not for him. He eventually was fired. The loss to Kansas was the death knell. But there was also a little bit of that gamesmanship. Well, you guys have your problem because Baylor was better at the time. Let's bring in a guy that's going to clean everything up, and we're going to be lily white clean. And that wasn't the case. But he did knock some people off the roster. Speaking of Texas,